It's Spoilerin time, folks, and I know it's been a couple of weeks. It's been a minute or two since we last talked to you, but finally, we are going to spoil episodes 6 and 7 of season 2 of Larry Sanders Show, but also Mr. Robot, both the episode 12 and the finale episode 13, which are all kind of the finale of Mr. Robot. We will give our thoughts on Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, and The Mandalorian, both Episode 7 and The Mandalorian finale. It's so good to be back in the new year. I'm Tom Merritt.
I'm Brian Brushwood. More importantly, we are joined by techno-thriller novelist and multiple award-winning awesome badass Andrew Main. Look, normally, I'm not going to lie. You're either kind of into the movie draft or you're not. But we've had so much excitement. I think this might be the most exciting part of the entire show as we checked in on their winter movie draft.
Who hacked the movie draft?
What's that? Who hacked the movie draft?
Frozen is only reporting, the API is only reporting 19 million for Frozen.
Yeah, that's not right.
So suddenly John Teasdale plummeted to the bottom.
Also, it's showing Rise of Skywalker at $51 million.
Yeah, so there's something wrong with the API that supplies the numbers to our movie draft challenge. But
you know what? Numbers... And Tom, you're right, because clearly something must be fundamentally broken, because it's showing Cats, the last of your true studs, the workhorse of your entire campaign, the one shining thing you could rely on.
Yeah, the thing that was going to bolster the Joker and put me over the top.
Yeah, it's showing that at under $10 million, and that can't be right.
No, this has definitely got more than $10 million. It's at least 11 or 12.
Actually, let me take a look at this box office mojo.
The last time I looked at the correct numbers, I was just a touch in front of Teasdale, and Frozen was making as much money every week as Cats. So I was very worried about Teasdale catching me, and Brett Rounceville and I both were nervous that Teasdale would pass us both up.
Okay, quick.
Because the 85% of Rise of Skywalker just wasn't seeming to have the momentum to catch John, possibly me, but not John.
Cats was a disaster.
Oh,
Tom.
It was an unmitigated disaster.
Do you remember 2019, Brian, when he was just wrong all the time about everything and he thought Cats was going to make a lot of money? Remember that guy? I'm glad he's dead.
It didn't have to be. Cats could have been big. It has a huge fan base, and they blew it. They just blew it.
Yeah, you saw the news stories where it's like I've never heard of this. They were pushing out upgraded patches to a movie after release. There were shots where Judi Dench's hands were visible, and they were after the release sending out updated copies of the movie where that stuff was fixed.
When you hear about something like that, and that never like that has happened, you know there was a fight that happened several weeks before between the director and the studio. We need to do this. We need to do this. And somebody's like, no, it's not going to be a problem. And then, well, what do you have here? Fine. Because they were ready to, because I guess he was still working on the edit for the Blu-ray or whatever. And
it's remarkable. These cats pooped the sandbox.
They're supposed to do that.
Actually, no, you know what?
Right.
They pooped in the mouth of anybody who went to see the movie Cats. That's it. There is that wrong enough?
Yeah, I think you got it.
It's a little wrong, but also apt.
That's amazing.
All right, let's stop meditating on just how horribly Cats has ruined my year or last year, and move on to something that delighted my year, The Mandalorian.
Yeah, dude. They did it. They landed. And that movie earned so much grace and goodwill from me early on that I'm not going to say it slowed down. Everything slowed down. Got a little bit kind of I don't want to compare it to Game of Thrones, but like Game of Thrones earned so much credit that I did not join the people who felt slighted by how that television show ended. And I would say that The Mandalorian earned enough credit fast enough and also delivered competently through the end of the first season that I'm very excited to see where they go from here.
Yeah, 70% of it was so good. I'll forgive the 30% that just made me cringe.
But even then, it wasn't like a rage-inducing cringe. It was just like, oh, you almost hit that note. I'm still rooting for you.
About a couple of those episodes, like certain director bringing in certain comedians in certain places where I'm like, oh my God, this is just cringing. Why is this scene still going on? Why is this character doing an impression of another character dressed like Ripley? This is really bad. Please make this stop. Please make this episode 8 minutes long.
Let's flip this positive, I think, anyway, and focus on the final episode, because I feel like the common reaction is for people to say, I love The Mandalorian except for this or that. And it's usually an episode or two or a scene or two. But I felt like personally that final episode just tied things up very well and was super enjoyable and cast a glow on the rest of the season that made me forget the things that I didn't like throughout it.
I liked the press release that they gave about what the next seasons would look like. We'll have you know what, we're going to have 2 arcs. There's going to be an arc where we got to find out the home planet, because that makes sense. But also you have another quest, because in the video game of The Mandalorian, you have 2 quests. One is to find the planet. The other is to train Baby Yoda. And then, as we all know,
to get him some armor.
Yeah, I like The Mandalorian very much, but I guess my caveat is, like, if you ask me, like, here's my list of my favorite, like, Game of Thrones is still like the best show of all time. I could go on about how much it's disappointed the last season, but I think it's like the best show ever. I never had an episode of Game of Thrones that made me cringe like some of Mandalorian did, but I love Mandalorian. I'm very excited for Mandalorian, and they're trying something so different. I'm excited for it, but to be honest about some of the writing and stuff, there's points where I'm like, holy cow, this felt like a rushed episode or this, but some of it, so the rest of it was so good, didn't care.
You know what? I think that's a good way to put it. I guess in financial circles, they talk about stock volatility. This is a highly volatile stock that
very
in general
range.
has high yields, but week over week will surprise and shock and terrify you.
I think that's pretty fair. It's very dynamic in its appeal. And maybe not in its content necessarily. But
the nice thing about
again, that final episode, I maybe you didn't like it as much as I did, but I loved the horrible treatment of Baby Yoda and the banter of the scout troopers and the fact.
Oh my gosh, I am in the minority of this one. Like,
least favorite comedy.
That whole opening banner of stormtroopers could have been the entire hour, and I would have been thrilled. Also, I think it was only a half an hour. I loved it.
Yeah. I enjoyed the first 3 minutes, and then I'm checking my watch because I know these are short shows, and I'm like, man, this is going on a bit for a show that's doesn't have a lot of running time left.
Dude, but punching a baby? Did you ever think, if I told you 20 years ago, like, hey man, eventually Star Wars is going to have a TV show that you love and stormtroopers are going to repeatedly punch a baby while talking small talk?
I watched them murder teddy bear Ewoks.
It's a 50-year-old child. It's not a baby.
Years old. It's not even elder abuse either, so...
But yeah, all I can do is second what you said, Brian. I thought I had enjoyed The Mandalorian very well, and then suddenly they set up a very cool press release for season 2, and I was enjoying it even more because I love those 2 quests. And as a viewer of Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, the appearance of the Darksaber in the hands of the Moff at the very end was very intriguing.
Moth meth? Moth meth? Can we call that?
I dug that too, and I'm like, oh, cool, the Darksaber. But I love Justin's take on it. He didn't know it. What did he describe that as? Is like the TIE Fighter Jaws of Life or something like that. He thought, I guess it's just part of your emergency kit. And we're all going, ooh, the Darksaber.
Yeah.
You know what's funny is I had never heard the term Darksaber, and to me that just read as Vibroblade, which is a Knights of the Old Republic thing, where it's like it's kind of near a lightsaber.
Well, I said. I told the Vibroblade's in here. It's earlier on. Some of the one of the Mandalorians used one to threaten Mando with it.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
All right. Now let's talk about Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. And I've talked about this a lot. if you go to Let's Talk About Star Wars, I had long conversations, 2 episodes worth of conversations about it with Jenny and Garrett. So I'll kind of direct you for most of my opinions, but I'll let you 2 start. Brian?
There is one moment that everybody is underappreciating about this movie. The first 3 words of the crawl are "the dead speak," and then they go on to explain that Emperor Palpatine has a podcast. And I can't get past thinking of, "You thought I was canceled. Hashtag canceled. But now I'm brought to you by Purple Mattresses." My Bill O'Reilly is here tonight. It's going to be great. Like the idea.
/Shiv.
Oh my God. The idea that the Emperor is hashtag canceled and has a podcast and they just sum it up in the opening crawl. Oh my God, this movie's a hot mess. Tom, this movie's a hot mess. It's so bad.
Mr. Snurdly, let's go.
Snurdly, I'm on twitch.tv/Palpy997. Yeah, the movie was bad and it should feel bad. What's fascinating to me is as more of the behind the scenes stuff comes out, sounds to me like Disney was too rigid on its schedule. JJ didn't have the bandwidth to bring it all together. Ultimately, I think that you could have made a 3rd movie in the final trilogy that would have been a fine ending to that story, but they went for the very, very ambitious thing of trying to pretend that 3 separate trilogies were secretly all meant to come together to this one moment. I likened it to, imagine if you're J.J. Abrams, you're like, oh, so we're going to finish things up. You're like, yeah, great. Here are 72 pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Here are 3 Uno cards. Here are the instructions to a Mercedes-Benz and a broken Rubik's Cube. That's a puzzle. We need you to solve it so that everybody agrees that everything was done on purpose. And of course,
and by the way, half of those, JJ, you made with the idea that some other poor schmuck was going to have to put them together later on.
Right. But they're like, and what's funny is I have enough faith in JJ that I think he could have pulled it off. But then they were just like, oh, also, yeah, we said an hour. If you could get us in 15 minutes, that'd be great.
So here, I love J.J. Abrams. Let me get I loved, and JJ, I would, as a storyteller, I would dare to drink the sweat from his socks as a storyteller. Like I can't even quantify that. And I believe everything you said is true about the pressure and stuff. This was the most J.J. Abrams thing I've ever experienced. You take everything that I walked out of Star Trek going, it's really fun until you think about it, and then it completely falls apart. And this was when Scorsese ripped into superhero movies about being theme park rides. This was that movie. This is to him what he thinks Marvel movies are.
That's a really, really good way of looking at it, because the first time I watched this, I had a great time. Because I was just like, oh, that's a fun thing. That's a cool thing. And like the Harry Potter ride at Universal Studios, if I look too closely, I could see the scaffolding. But that just ruined the ride. So I chose to enjoy my ride and I had a fun time. And there was some cool stuff in there. The second time I watched it, it was interesting. I found more problems in the first half than the second half, more things that bothered me in the first half and the second half. And like I said, I go into detail on all of that, and Let's Talk About Star Wars. And different things bothered me the first time because I was being more critical. But I felt like there was some really cool storytelling towards the second half that, with a little focus, like you said, Brian, like if you'd been given more time and allowed a little more space instead of just these 2 years, if they're like, yeah, you could take 5 years, 6 years, whatever, maybe that would have been brought into more focus. Maybe it wouldn't have. But I love I feel some of the prequel logic, which is like, wow, there's a really good movie in there that could be extracted. And there's some really fun concepts, but it's all over the place.
Tom, and I have no problem with a single choice as far as like bringing Emperor back, all this. You want to make Rey the Grand. Oh, no problem. I don't have a single problem with a choice about that. And if you told me they were going to rewrite this and make a 2-movie version of this where we get a better lead up to Palpatine coming back. We get that broadcast coming out. We get Kylo finding him. That version of the story, which is the same story, but telling it that way, I would be excited about.
By the way, I forgot one of the most important aspects in that metaphor of trying to act as though you meant to have everything come together in the puzzle pieces thing. Imagine also, after being told that you have 1/4 of the time that you thought you had, they also walk in with a hammer and then bang the broken pieces of the Rubik's cube and said, "Oh, also one of your principal actors died. Bye." And then off they go. Like, I mean, there was no way. There was no way, and I don't blame anyone for how I couldn't fix any of that. You aren't paid millions of dollars to fix these things, O'Brien. Step one is maybe I would have chosen a different co-writer. Who's a co-writer?
I love Chris Terrio's Argo, but the guy who did Batman versus Superman.
Oh.
Argo and Batman versus Superman and Rise of Skywalker.
And but Brian, your point is exactly, we don't know the pressure, how many hoops they had to go through and all that. I mean, God knows what it's like to go in front of the committee. But here's the question I'm going to ask you, Tom. In the final sequence, when Rey and Kylo are fighting in front of the Emperor in that scene, who's the audience?
Oh, you mean the audience in the movie?
No. The cackling hyenas, like, we are so Sith.
Who knows? I could absolutely do without that audience. It's
are they
Sith ghosts?
Sithies.
So we get these. We've heard, and that's the thing that's when I point out, like, here's the thing. You got 100,000 people in a scene, and I ask everybody who they are. I know what the screenwriter said they are, and they said they're Sith loyalists.
Okay.
Oh, that's even worse. I like phantom Sith ghosts that are partially pulled into this realm by the Emperor's magic. I would buy more than like actual people.
Yeah. It was a very Harry Potter-esque sort of thing too, where like a bunch of people had port keys and showed up for this thing. But yeah.
Well, now J.J. Abrams know what it's like to deal with the fandom menace. No? I thought it was okay. Come on. I can't be the first to think of that one.
I will say, Brian, that your description of the, trying to solve the puzzle reminds me of times when someone's told me, like, you can't do this. And I've been like, no, you just do this, this, and this, and it works. And people go, oh my gosh, that's amazing. You're right. Or times when they say, you can't do this. And I say, well, you just do this, and then pull this other thing, and then do this, and then that, and this every time. And people are like, no, that's not going to work. And this kind of feels like
nutty idea. You know what? I want to take it back. I'm going to take everything I just said back. You set this movie 1,000 years in the future, and you make it mainly about a totally unrelated, Force-sensitive child who is hearing the stories, the echoes of stories of Olympian gods. And it's mixed up and it's muddled and it's confusing and weird and it's postmodern. And I bet that might have worked better than this piece of garbage.
the end as Rey plants the lightsabers in there, we get a slow dissolve. We pan down through like some sort of like clay background, and we see people standing over Jar Jar Binks as he wakes up. Misa had a horrible dream.
Oh my god! I did like the idea that by having a yellow lightsaber at the end, basically they implied like, hey, we're done with this red state, blue state nonsense. We're all going libertarian. That was a really cool nod to the libertarian party they were making.
I took that as like, hey, that yellow lightsaber you had on your Luke Skywalker action figure is finally canon. Thank you.
Forget the green one from Return of the Jedi. It's fine.
I really liked the idea that it didn't matter what her family was, that her forget how we got there, and maybe this isn't going to work for you because of all the problems getting there, but the idea that your grandfather was the most evil man, no dispute, in the galaxy, that doesn't mean you have to be evil. You can choose your own role models. You can choose what family you want to consider yourself a part of. I really like that. I thought that was
question.
Yeah, she gave zero thought about the fact that her grandfather was Palpatine.
Yeah.
It was never even a bump in the road. Your grandfather's this guy. Oh, okay. Anyhow,
wasn't Palpatine Luke's grandfather? Was it an implied that he used Sith powers to immaculately
a scene from a comic that the people who wrote the comic said, no, that's not what we meant by that. So
got it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And the final shot of her proud parents looking upon her as ghosts, and Luke and Leia finally having the incest baby they wanted.
Okay.
Come on, folks. Anything else on the Rise of Skywalker?
I loved every scene with Snap Wexley, best character in the whole 980.
Rest in peace, Temmin.
Yeah. Geez,
all right, let's go on to
it was
Mr. Robot.
it was a beautiful movie. Visually, I loved it.
Set pieces were great. Everything's great. Look. We're not listing the things that we love. There's plenty to love about it. It's only interesting to talk about the stuff we didn't like. All right.
All right, let's talk about Mr. Robot. What didn't you like about it?
Nothing. Pretty great.
Well, then there's nothing interesting to talk about, is there, Brian?
I will say it was a softer landing. What I wanted out of the 1-2 punch of the last 2 episodes was a surprise that would emotionally overwhelm me and make me cry. Instead, I just got a reasonably decent surprise. It was a fine twist on a twist on a twist. And that end scene of us being acknowledged as a literal character in the show, and of us joining Elliot Alderson, air quotes, to watch the movie of the rest of Elliot's life it's fine. It's adorable and weirdly sweet, and I liked it a lot.
Yeah. This is kind of personally my best case scenario ending for this series is that this was just an exploration. You could call it It's All a Dream, but it's so much more complex than that because it's so much of Elliot's reality in what we saw.
I think it sticks the landing in a visceral, concrete way that It's Just a Dream doesn't, where it's like, we all had a role. We were all part of this. Our story is done. And now the real story begins. Also, let us flatly and concretely make clear that everything really did happen. And
except the stuff that didn't happen.
Well, correct. Except for, yes, correct.
Also, by the way, Tom, absolutely, you were right. Last time we talked about Mr. Robot on exactly what was going to happen. Ray,
yeah, I mean, I wasn't sure I was good that's how it was going to play out. That's how I wanted it to play out. Yeah.
Really, really, really good stuff. I just that last scene where they're in the theater and it's going into the light and then it turns into the iris. I spent time trying to see if there was if that was gonna be somebody else's eye or if they had some weird guest actor listed, but they didn't. But I like that ambiguity. The ambiguity of who could did this person even look like the mastermind or not?
I mean, how amazing that we are. And by the way, Andrew, are you caught up?
No, I mean, I watched the first 2 seasons, but I'm like, okay, cool, this is fun. I'm gonna go watch other stuff now.
I mean,
so I never
as long as you're fine with us full on spoiling
totally.
stuff.
Yeah. I know the name of the show.
The very last episode is, it is revealed that our Elliot Alderson was never the real Elliot Alderson. And I guess I was about to say we never meet the real Elliot Alderson, but we definitely do when he's wearing a sweater and has his act together.
We just didn't know that was the real Elliot at the time.
Yeah.
But also that's a fantasy Elliot. That is
right.
That is him. That's him, but we don't know that represents.
But he's not
his
dealing
life.
with real world conditions, right? He's dealing with optimized fantasy conditions to keep him out of the picture.
And you know what? The more I think about it, the more I like the idea. If you're just going to add one more twist on a show that made itself famous for twists, how about the twist be no. The last character you meet is the healthy, self-actualized, real, whole person who now gets to live in a world that is factually better by all the metrics.
No, but I don't know that he's healthy or well actually because maybe this is me timelining it up, but wouldn't the real Elliot still have been addicted to opioids? And
I'm willing to give it the storytelling grace of much like the character Legion, had multiple personalities and each one had a different mutant power or whatever. I'm willing to say that maybe a personality would have an addiction, but the other personality would not.
Yeah, I could live with that. I actually like entertaining the idea that none of them are Elliot. They're all pieces of Elliot. And at the end, the only way for Elliot to really survive as Elliot is to integrate all of them and solve the problems of all of them.
Yeah. Super solid ending. Here's what we won't know until somebody writes us in, cordkillers@gmail.com, is how much better this whole story is as an entire single session binge.
Yeah.
Because I would imagine with the level of detail that they've given that it gets a massive upgrade in a way like we largely panned Westworld because we were watching it week after week, but everybody who I know binged the first season generally loved it. So
and this season introduces two, I mean, there are lots of revelations, but the two big revelations of the season, the violent nature of his relationship with his dad, and the fact that the mastermind is a persona. Those are two more things you can go and rewatch the whole series again, and suddenly X, Y, and Z now make more
things
sense.
popping
you have a
out.
new lens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Definitely well done. Man, oh man, Sam Esmail, what a talent. I'm so glad that he was introduced to our lives.
I say that like I watching it as a distant observer on this was like I enjoyed the storytelling in the first two seasons. I like this, and watching the reaction I've seen, I read some critical analysis of the final season, final episode. Everybody seems pretty happy and pretty like, hey, they landed it. They ended it in a place where when you're doing unreliable narrator, it's hard to make that satisfying. And it sounds like they nailed that, which that extra curve. And so the idea of like, it's hard to end a show or series. Like, I don't know. There are a lot of examples of people doing it pretty good.
Yeah.
It is hard, but it's not impossible. That's the thing, right? Yeah. And it also depends on the story. Certain stories are harder to end than others. Depends on where you're at. Yeah. All right. Anything else on Mr. Robot?
Nope. Let's do Larry Sanders.
I've been looking forward to this one since I first saw the thumbnail with David Letterman in it. It was Left Behind Larry, where we get a fake story about Larry having to choose who's going to come on and do a show after him, right after Letterman has left NBC to take over CBS's first slot. And David Letterman is going to get to pick who will come on after him on CBS. Now, in this parallel universe, Gary Shandling is playing Larry Sanders, so Larry and David are competitors. But in the real universe, David tapped Gary Shandling for that role, and Gary Shandling said, no, I'd rather do the Larry Sanders show. So there's this great backstory wrapped around this.
And on top of that, Tom Snyder did have the slot after Letterman, right?
Right. When Letterman says Tom Snyder, that's what happened. That's what actually happened in our world, is Tom Snyder got it. And of course, in the Larry Sanders world, Larry steals Tom Snyder away and gets him to be the person coming on after him.
This was also doubly precious to me because I don't know if I've ever shared this story with you, but I called in on Tom Snyder's show when I was in high school.
Oh,
it
wow.
was late at night. He made some passing comment about the Incredible Hulk made for TV movie that had a version of Daredevil in it. And I had read an article talking about how they were kind of, in a proto early thing. Maybe we could set up a number of Marvel TV shows, build out a universe or whatever. He had made a dismissive joke about that show, like, well, I don't know, maybe they'll do more of that. And I was like, oh, well, I should tell him about that article thing I have. So it being I think 11:30 at night, I dial the number, I call in, and the phone screener gets me on. I sit through the break or whatever, and I'm just like, okay, oh, no, it's happening. I'm on the air. I'm on a nationwide radio show. I'm talking to Tom Snyder, the guy I fall asleep to every single night. And I start to say, oh, yeah, I just wanted to tell you about this Incredible Hulk thing. And then click, I hear a phone pick up, and I hear my mom's sleepy voice say, I cannot believe you just woke me up. This is happening live on air on nationwide radio. And I say,
you would have been a meme if the internet was what it was now.
I know. And I'm like, Mom, I'm on the radio. And she's like, what? And I'm like, I'm on the radio. And then Tom joins in saying like, go back to bed, Mom. Don't worry about it. We're talking about the Hulk. She's like, what? All right.
That's a great
And then eventually
story.
it was so like I'm flush even now remembering the next level of embarrassment that I was experiencing.
Told your mom to go back to bed. That's brilliant.
Tom, yeah. So me, my mom, and Tom Snyder had a three-way call.
Yeah, you did. You can say that. That's a literally true thing that you just said. Wow. I think your story is better than this episode, to be honest. And this episode is pretty good.
It was that was one of the episodes where you just appreciated how much they were throwing in it, because like the whole the Dana Carvey back and forth of that of hinting at what was going on behind the scenes of him being the replacement for Carson and stuff, and I loved how close to the time of these things unfolding they were putting that in there.
Yeah, and the idea that he wanted Bobcat Goldthwait, I found eminently entertaining as well. And to the point where I'm like, oh, please show me what it would look like. And they did when they did the affiliate promotion version.
Also,
that was genius.
That whole simulation, eventually, I mean, that pretty much was the template for the Eric Andre show. Like they called that. Maybe a young Eric Andre was like, yeah, that works. Let me call Adult Swim. Let me just send in this as my sizzle reel.
We also followed that with Artie's Gone, which I thought would be kind of a filler episode when it started. It was Artie is stuck behind a mudslide out in Malibu and he can't get in. And so Paula, played by Janine Garofalo, has to produce the show. And it ended up being brilliant. I love that Paula never totally failed. She was competent and on top of a lot of things, but believably couldn't possibly be competent and on top of all the things and hide the fact that Artie was gone all at the same time, to the point where she just couldn't help. I would have been Paula. They're like, yeah, have a glass of wine. Like, that's a stupid idea. Oh my God, I'm so desperate. I'm going to have a glass of wine. I'm going to drink this glass of wine. I don't care what happens.
As we've talked about, Artie increasingly is my favorite character on the entire show. That dynamic between Larry needing Artie to, just like, you got it, buddy. You got it, buddy. To make it happen. I love everything about that. Separate thing. It was fun to see Hank doing magic, which he would later play a character mocking his son for doing magic.
Yeah. What I thought was great about that episode too was the every show kind of has their what's the fatal flaw that Larry has that will kind of ruin. And if in Larry's fatal flaw is his confidence, is he has to be lied to, and that's the one thing Janine Garofalo's character forgot to do or didn't. Her ego got a hold of her, and she wouldn't lie. Well, Larry, was me doing it all along.
Guess what?
That's the one thing you can't do.
Yeah, no, that was brilliant because then we ended up with the freaking card trick. Hubris. It's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's all I got on Artie's Gone and Left Behind Larry. Y'all have anything else?
Yeah, the Artie's Gone. It's funny because it's almost as though that episode was sort of a press release of like, hey, guess who's a really important character in this show? Let us remind you by showing you what it might look like if he wasn't on this. Also, if Artie's not your favorite character, he needs to be starting now.
I can't agree. Artie is one of my favorites, if not my very favorite in the show. Although I kind of like Paula, especially. I'm glad Paula got an episode. I feel like she didn't get enough time.
Well, they're all like. I mean, I like Hank, Jeffrey Tambor's. I mean, he's just he's such a weird version of an Ed McMahon carbon copy, but not everything kind of without the heroism from fighting in World War II and everything else, and all the schemes he has going on that just, you think you should be super wealthy with all the schemes, but how everything sort of falls apart on him.
Yeah.
Well, folks, that's going to wrap it up for Spoilerin Time. Andrew Mayne, thank you so much for hanging out with us again.
Hey, thank you for letting me be here, guys.
AndrewMaine.com is, of course, the best way to go. What kind of delights will people find?
Basically, they're going to find a list of entries that haven't been updated in forever. Mention of my book, Dark Pattern. I got to put the new book up there, Girl Went to Sea, which comes out in May. And then my VR stuff, mainly books, just books. I write books, people.
Go into Amazon and search Andrew Mayne. You'll find a world of delights.
And I think a lot of them are on Kindle Unlimited. If you have Kindle Unlimited, just click and read. Don't have to pay anything other than your monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited.
Hey, folks, thanks for supporting us. Patreon.com/CordKillers. You guys get the Spoilerin Time early because we love you, and we'll see you again next time.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.